What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. And as always, we have ourselves a jam-packed show as we have a lot to get into. As this week we have volleyball in the NBA. Yes, the NBA returns to Long Beach, but it's not where it's at, as it's now in a different location. Where is it going to be at? Well, I'm about to tell you because, once again, I am your one-stop shop for all that is NBA news. And how about the VNL on the women's side? There are no more undefeated teams as Poland, China, and the U.S. all lost at least once last weekend. Who beat those teams? Also, the Big Ten released its women's volleyball schedule as there's going to be a lot of barn burners. And we've got some schedule releases. Also, I've got a big announcement for episode 200 of Set Point next week. You're not going to want to miss it. So hand me a volleyball, set the net, because I'm about to serve you up some volleyball action here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome one, welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Thank you all for joining me on this beautiful Monday afternoon, Monday morning, Monday wherever you are listening from. Either way, you have made your way into episode 199 of Set Point. And without any further delay, let's get started. But first and foremost, Set Point would not be where it's at without IE Sports Radio to provide the platform to go live on Spreaker. Please do follow IE Sports Radio on Twitter, TikTok, and on Instagram at IE Sports Radio. We also have a Facebook page for those that still use Facebook. All you just got to do is type in the word IE, then sports, then radio in the search bar, and then you see our logo, like us and follow us, and then boom, that's how you're able to follow us and like us on Facebook. We also have a website, www.iesportsradio.com, and when you go there, you will see a Patreon link at the top, and if you choose to donate, donations will start at $5 a month. This will get you a shout-out from all of our shows, as I believe we are now up to 32 shows, and higher tiers include IE Sports Radio merchandise, access to ISRU, the podcasting university of IE Sports Radio, and even a chance to be featured on a segment of our flagship show, The Defining Moment with Larry B. Because for the past 9 years and counting, IE Sports Radio has been bringing you amazing content, ranging from interviewing legendary athletes, coaches, and other authorized media personnel, to building tailor-made shows dedicated to all major sports days around the country. All the while, we've continued to be by the fans and for the fans, and with your help, we are ready to take the next biggest step. Thank you to everyone for all of your support and for making IE Sports Radio your direct feed for all that sports. We are currently up to 32 shows, as I've confirmed that. Shout out to our Patreon supporters, Bay Area Raised Apparel, Key to the Gate, Marcus Losgreat, and a donor that wishes to remain anonymous. Now let's begin. As I apologize if I'm a little late starting the show, as first of all, I had to shift the show's time start around as I've got work a little bit later on during my part-time job. Also, I was supposed to start at 11 a.m. Pacific time, but unfortunately I got an urgent text as it's time to get into that big super special surprise that I alluded to on Twitter, whether it was via my personal Twitter account or whether it was via my Setpoint Twitter account. And please do follow Setpoint on Twitter at set_point.ie. So my big super special surprise is that for next week's show, episode 200, I tweeted out that I was 0 for 2 in terms of getting guests for my show, and two guests had yet to respond, or 2 potential guests had yet to respond. Well, that had changed, as one of those guests that hadn't responded actually responded to me, and one of those guests was Avery Drost. So he actually said he'd love to join the show, and keep your fingers crossed because we're going to hopefully get him confirmed and locked in to possibly being a guest on next week's show. As Avery Drost is the former Miracosta High School boys volleyball coach, and he's currently an AVP player. As I interviewed him at the Huntington Beach Open. I would definitely love to have Avery Drost on the show. I think he would be a great guest to have, and he's just a very down-to-earth guy, and he just got back from his trip to Alaska, so I'd really like to have him on the show, but we just got to get a time confirmed to have him live on the show. And also next week, possibly we'll have Nick England back on the show, but we'll have to see on who else we can get as a guest. I hesitate to have Nick England on as a guest just because, well, for starters, we have the NVA this weekend as, well, he's going to be coaching, and his team, the San Diego Wild, is actually the last match of event number 4. So I imagine he's going to be pretty gassed in terms of coaching and having to drive from San Diego to Long Beach or Lakewood, and then having to drive all the way back to San Diego. So we'll see what happens, but if anything, we could have him on as an emergency guest, and he definitely is willing to support the show. So that's kind of your little episode 200 news, and basically the big surprise, and yeah, that's kind of your update on episode 200. I want it to be super electric, just kind of like the 100th episode of Set Point, because you only get a 200th episode once per show. But I guess you also get like a milestone show like every once in a while. But I digress on that. All right, but with that being said, let's get on to some actual volleyball. So the VNL was last week, and honestly, it was quite eventful as, like I mentioned in the introduction, there are no more undefeated teams in the VNL, as the U.S. women's national team, they had themselves an interesting week. So they started their week on last Tuesday against Croatia, and in the first set they kind of showed a little bit of rust. The U.S. showed a little bit of rust as they lost the first set 25-17, but then the U.S. reestablished themselves, took that second set 25-22. Set 3, they kind of kicked it into overdrive, and then they took that set 25-18, and then the fourth set, they just looked so much better, and then they took it 25-15 as they moved to 5-0 in VNL pool play. They had Wednesday, June 14th off, but on Thursday, June 15th, they faced Thailand, and long story short, they brought out the brooms and swept them 25-21, 25-18, and 25-16. Friday, June 16th, they had off. And then on Saturday, June 17th, they faced Japan. Now, Japan was kind of a sneaky good team, and they were coming off of a 5-set loss to Germany. But in this match, it was kind of an interesting match, and this could have been an early preview of a playoff match in the VNL. So the first set, the U.S. took it 25-23. It was quite the battle in the first set. The second set, Japan led 24-21. Credit to the U.S., they fought off 3 set points, but Japan took that second set 25-23. Then the third set, Japan really turned on the gas, and they took that third set 25-19. Then the fourth set, the U.S. took it 25-23 off of a dump kill from their setter. I want to say her name was something Evans. I don't know the first name, but either way, the two teams were going to a fifth set, and honestly, going into that fifth set, the U.S. was 3-0 in 5-set matches, while Japan was 0-2, and I was thinking, well, this might actually work in the U.S.'s favor, as, well, the U.S. is undefeated in 5-set matches, well, unfortunately for Japan, they are winless in 5-set matches, so that was kind of my mindset going in, and the U.S., and it was Ashley Evans. Ashley Evans was the one that put down that dump kill. But in the fifth set, oh my goodness, I did not know what happened in this fifth set as Japan stormed out to an early 4-0 lead, and that 4-0 lead grew into a 6-0 lead, and then eventually Japan was up 9-1 at the time, and that lead grew to a 12-2 lead, and eventually Japan took that fifth set 15-6. Japan straight up steamrolled the U.S. in that fifth set. So any doubt of Japan being bad in 5-set matches is basically thrown out the window. It's kaput. It's burnt to death. So Japan basically won, and they handed the U.S., for the second straight VNL season, its first loss of VNL play. So obviously it was a tough loss, and going into that match, the U.S. was actually the only team that was undefeated in VNL pool play. Every other team had lost, as Poland had lost to the Netherlands on Friday, June 16th. They lost in straight sets, which was very surprising. And then earlier that day, China actually lost to that said Poland team in straight sets. So before the U.S. got to play Japan, the U.S. found itself undefeated in VNL pool play. But after they faced Japan, the U.S. was the only team, the U.S. being the only team that was undefeated in pool play, is no longer undefeated in VNL play. So basically, like I've mentioned, I feel there's so much parity and there's so much balance, and that a lot of these matches are just so unpredictable. So going into yesterday's matchup against Brazil, so this matchup against Brazil was very interesting. So Brazil and the U.S., like I've mentioned a million gazillion fofillion times, when it comes to the U.S. versus Brazil in any sort of volleyball, all bets are off. However, Brazil, unfortunately, had some bad news going into this week. So on Monday, Brazil lost one of its top players, Ana Cristina, who is out for the rest of the VNL due to a knee injury that she suffered in training, which is very, very, very unfortunate for Brazil, as they really could have used her in the match against the U.S. And in the match against the U.S., there were 10,000 fans, and you got to remember that Brazil is the home team. And there were just so many screaming fans who were just really cheering on for both these teams. So the first set, the U.S. took it 25-22. Brazil did all that it could with the players at hand, like Julia Bergman, the former Georgia Tech star. But unfortunately for the U.S., they just had just enough firepower to take that first set. Second set was a little bit different, as the U.S. was in a little bit more of a comfortable state. They took it 25-19. They were up 2-0. And suddenly, it looked like Brazil just really needed Ana Cristina. And then the third set, the U.S., they didn't really need to put it into cruise control, but they just needed to just do enough to win, as they took the third set 25-22, taking the match in straight sets, sweeping Brazil on its home floor, which is never easy to do. And I'm very impressed that the U.S. was able to do that. Now, for Brazil, it's so easy to say that they really miss Ana Cristina. Like, they really miss her. But they have other talent. But for them, I think this loss will definitely be their wake-up call. I think for Brazil, that they kind of need this loss as this to be their wake-up call, and for them to like get their bell rung. And for the U.S. that lost to Japan, they kind of need this loss to basically have that be their wake-up call. Just because the U.S. is not invincible. The U.S. playing 5-set matches is absolutely not healthy for them. Because you can't just live on the edge just playing 5-set match after 5-set match after 5-set match after 5-set match every single match. It just does not work that way. Because those 5-set matches are eventually going to catch up to you. And you have to remember that the U.S. is fairly young for the most part. They have a mixture of youth and experience. It's not like the gold medal team from the Olympics from a few years ago, which won gold. It's not like that. So for the U.S., I'll say this about their win over Brazil. It was impressive, but I wish we could have seen Brazil having Ana Cristina. Like, having Ana Cristina could have been a game changer. And her suffering that knee injury on Monday is just really unfortunate. But I'll give credit to Brazil. They're 6-2, and they're in a good position. And the fact that they did not lose any match going into that matchup against the U.S. is rather impressive. Yes, they had to go 5 with Serbia, but unfortunately Serbia they aren't really the Serbia from last year, which is super unfortunate. But there's still plenty of time for them. Like, Serbia, they're currently 3-5 right now. They're basically on the cusp of making the top 8 and being on the outside looking in. So like I said, there are no more undefeated teams in the women's VNL, as Poland, like I said, they lost to Netherlands, which I think it's kind of a surprise right there, because Netherlands is all the way down at number 12, and they've only won 2 matches. But this just goes to show you cannot underestimate anybody. You just can't underestimate anybody when it comes to this whole VNL. And then China, obviously them losing to Poland was rough as well. But they also lost to Italy yesterday in 5 sets. So, again, losing... And Italy is... I told you all that Italy is a fairly decent team. I don't think that 5-set loss to the U.S. did them any justice. I tried to tell you all that Italy is fairly good. And I think that they definitely have a chance to prove themselves. And currently, Italy rests at 8th in the top 16, and if the playoffs start today, Italy would be playing Poland, and Italy is a healthy 5-3. They're 2 games ahead of Serbia. They're tied with Japan for the 7th spot, but Japan has more points than Italy, so you have that to work with as well. And then Brazil and Germany are both tied with a 6-2 record. However, Brazil has more points than Germany. China and Brazil, surprisingly, have the same set, point, and record. So I don't know how that tiebreaker is going to work. It might just be head-to-head if the two have faced one another, which they have not. And they're probably not going to face one another, which I don't know how that tiebreaker is going to work. But, oh no, they did face one another. They faced one another in the first match in round 1, and China won. So it's going to go head-to-head. So it's going to go head-to-head after point, and then set ratio, and then record ratio, and whatnot. So, yeah. And then the U.S. and Poland are tied for first place at 7-1. However, Poland has more points than the U.S., so they currently occupy the top spot, while the U.S. is right behind them. Turkey is 6-2 with 19 points, so they're right behind the U.S., and they have the same number of points. So there's kind of your little standings right there. Believe it or not, the U.S. actually opens up the final leg or final round of pool play against Poland on Tuesday, June 27th at 11:30 p.m. Pacific time. Oh God, that's gonna be brutal. So that's already the battle for first place right there, and that is not even scripted. So if you're thinking that there's volleyball script writers in this thing, you're sadly mistaken. And then for the U.S., they've also got Bulgaria, which, well, Bulgaria, looking at them, they are currently near the bottom of the standings. But just like when it came to the Netherlands versus Poland, the U.S. cannot underestimate that. Otherwise, that could eventually cost them in terms of seeding. And it could cost them the top spot. And then after that, they move on to July, where they face Germany, which Germany is actually in the top 8, and Germany is 6-2, and they still have a chance for the top spot. And they're only 1 game back of the U.S., which is very crazy. And then to close out the VNL pool play, you've got China taking on the U.S. on July 2nd, which is not next Sunday, but the following Sunday. And that's going to be a 1:30 a.m. start time. And I'm not staying up that late, especially if I have to work that day. So, yeah, that's basically the U.S.'s up-and-coming slate right there. As for Poland, other than playing the U.S., they've also got Germany as well, which, man, that's going to be a great game right there. It's going to be a great matchup right there. And then they've got Bulgaria, which, no offense to Poland, but they're probably going to handle Bulgaria. They just can't underestimate them. And then to close out VNL pool play, they've got South Korea, which is sitting at the bottom of the standings, unfortunately. So that's basically who Poland has. Poland kind of has the easier of the two schedules between the U.S. and for Poland. So time will tell if Poland can take care of their side versus the U.S., but all eyes are on that first matchup between the U.S. versus Poland, and that's going to be a barn burner right there. And I really can't wait for that matchup to go down. I think that's going to be the make or break matchup. That could really decide the top spot in the up and coming top 8, and that could be the top seed right there. And these next matches will be played in Suwon, Korea. So there's your little information tidbit right there. And the finals will be played, like I've mentioned, on July 12th through the 16th at College Park Center in Arlington, Texas. So the U.S. is the host of this. And like I've mentioned before, if you're in the Texas area, please do go to this event. You definitely have to support local volleyball in the United States. You definitely will not be disappointed. And man, I just wish I was in the Texas area that weekend. It's the one time I actually wish I was in the Texas area, not the California area. But I digress. But for the U.S., people call the U.S. sweeping Brazil a shocker. I don't think that's a shocker at all, because not having Anna Cristina, which I send my well wishes to her on a speedy recovery, obviously is just not the same. It's kind of like a cracked mirror. It's just not the same. It just doesn't have that same look and same feel and that same. It just never looks the same. And losing a player of her Excalibur just does not bode. It does not help mentally and physically for the entire Brazil team. So unfortunately for Brazil, it's just something that they'll have to move on from. But we'll see what happens for Brazil going forward. I still think they're in a good position, and we shall see. All right, so that is that for the VNL on the women's side, and the U.S. is doing a great job. And other than that 5-set loss to Japan, but Japan was kind of overdue for a 5-set win, especially when they were 0-2, and I kind of jinxed it. I guess I should say that, but I wasn't the one that said the U.S. is the only undefeated team in VNL play. I did not say that. That was someone else, but for purposes of I don't want to be a tattletale, I'm not going to give away who said that, who was the person who said that the U.S. was the only undefeated team in VNL play. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to give away who said that. Nope. Anyway, so that is that for the U.S. women's national team. So jumping on over to the U.S. men's national team and the men's VNL. So for the VNL men's side of things, that begins tomorrow, if not today, as for the U.S., they kick off the VNL Week 2 against Serbia, and then on Wednesday they face China. Both of those are at 7:30 a.m. starts, and then on Friday, June 23rd, they play Iran, and then on Saturday, June 24th, they play Poland. So looking at the U.S.'s opponent breakdowns, Serbia is 8th in these standings, which is a pretty fairly good opponent. I mean, Serbia obviously wants to improve its standing. And then looking at China is, they are down below in the standings. But that does not mean that the U.S. can underestimate them. China has at least one win, and if they've got one win, then they have to be pretty good. Like, every team in the men's VNL has one win. Now, in terms of teams that are undefeated, there's only one undefeated team, and that's actually Japan. And then looking at Iran is 11th, which Iran is actually 1-3, but that's probably a very misguiding 1-3 team. And then lastly, Poland is 6th in the standings. So the U.S. plays 2 top 8 teams, and then they've got the 11th and 16th ranked teams in the standings. But as for the U.S., they're obviously coming off of a 4-set loss to Brazil, but they can't dwell on that loss for much longer because there is a logjam for second place. There are 5 3-1 teams, and it's so tight in terms of that second place spot, as 4 of those 5 3-1 teams have 9 points. And then Poland, unfortunately, has 7 points, as they're kind of the odd team out. And then Japan, being the only undefeated team, they play Canada tomorrow. Canada is unfortunately having rough luck. They are 15th as they'll look to try to right the ship. And then Japan, the following day, they play Cuba. Cuba is 13th, but I feel they're going to get reinforcements from their U21 team. I'm not entirely sure if they can use players from that team. Don't quote me on that. And then on Thursday, June 22nd, Japan gets a big test when they play Brazil. And then on Saturday, June 24th, they face Argentina. Brazil is 5th in the standings, and then Argentina is 3rd. So after they face Cuba, it's going to start to really ramp up for Japan, as Japan is going to really get tested, as they've got 12 points, and they've only dropped 2 sets all match long, and they've won 12 sets, which is kind of irrelevant, but it is what it is. So like I said, Japan is the only undefeated VNL men's team, while the US, Argentina, Slovenia, Brazil, and Poland are all 3-1. Netherlands, Serbia, and Italy are all 2-2. Italy's kind of the interesting team, because everyone says they're young and inexperienced, but they're 2-2. And if they're young and that inexperienced, they're going to be super deadly come the future. But we'll see. And then everyone else that I did not mention is 1-3. So everyone else has at least one win, which is good. It just shows the parity, and it shows that there's no such thing as a bad team in terms of the VNL on the men's side. And it shows the balance, and it shows that there is actually competitiveness, which I like. I don't like seeing one not-so-good team and then one team that's just beating up on everybody. Or at least one or two teams beating up on everybody. I like to see competitive balance, and I like to see like this whole any given day thing, like the NFL thing. So we'll see what happens on the VNL side of things on the men's side tomorrow. I think it's going to be super exciting, but time will tell. All right, so that is that for the VNL men's side of things in week number 2. Let's jump on over to some NCAA women's volleyball, as the Big Ten released its women's volleyball conference schedule last, I want to say it was Tuesday, as it was released on June 15th, so that was actually Thursday. Oops. So yeah, it was released June 15th. So this was as of June 15th. So conference play in terms of the Big Ten starts on June 20th, which is a Wednesday. Illinois will hit the road to Indiana, Minnesota will play at Iowa, and Rutgers will play at Penn State. And then the real fun begins. Purdue is at Maryland, Michigan State is at Michigan, which, boy howdy, you've got the rivalry match right there. And then you get into the real good stuff. You get Ohio State at Nebraska, which, that's already barn burner city. Then you've got Wisconsin and Northwestern, which is kind of a sneaky good matchup. Northwestern's kind of leveling up in terms of getting recruits despite getting hit hard in terms of graduation and the transfer portal. Then on Sunday, September 24th, Sunday, you've got Michigan State at Illinois, Indiana at Wisconsin, Ohio State at Iowa, Michigan at Maryland, Minnesota at Nebraska, another barn burner right there, Penn State at Northwestern, another sneaky good matchup, and Purdue at Rutgers. Then Wednesday, September 27th, you've got Maryland at Rutgers and Wisconsin at Ohio State. Wisconsin at Ohio State. That's going to be somewhat of a barn burner. I don't know how good Ohio State's going to be, but I think you can never count out Jen Flynn Oldenburg's team. That Ohio State team is probably going to turn heads, most likely. But I think Wisconsin is going to be just fine, but you can never ever count out Ohio State. I think Ohio State is back as the team. Then Friday, September 29th, you've got Penn State at Illinois, Iowa at Indiana, Michigan at Minnesota, Michigan State at Northwestern, and Nebraska at Purdue. Nebraska at Purdue, that one looks like a really good matchup right there. Michigan at Minnesota, that's a sneaky good matchup as well. And Penn State at Illinois could also be sneaky good depending on who in Illinois has. And then Saturday, September 30th, we got Saturday slates as Nebraska is at Indiana, Illinois is at Yeah, Iowa is at Illinois, and then Penn State is at Minnesota. So that is basically a 2-game turnaround right there. And for Penn State, they've got Illinois one night, and then they've got a quick turnaround as they are at Minnesota. Then Sunday, October 1st, Michigan is at Wisconsin, Maryland is at Ohio State, Rutgers is at Michigan State, and Northwestern is at Purdue. Wednesday, October 4th, Illinois is at Purdue, and Wisconsin is at Iowa. Friday, October 6th, Indiana is at Penn State, Minnesota is at Maryland, Northwestern is at Michigan, Nebraska is at Michigan State, and Ohio State is at Rutgers. Saturday, October 7th, Wisconsin is at Illinois, which is a sneaky good matchup. Indiana is at Maryland, Iowa is at Purdue, Nebraska is at Michigan, another good sneaky good matchup. Northwestern is at Michigan State, Minnesota is at Rutgers, and Ohio State is at Penn State, which that's kind of your matchup you got to circle on that date. Then on Wednesday, October 11th, you've got Purdue at Indiana, rivalry match right there. That's a good matchup right there. And then Minnesota at Michigan, the Battle of the M's. That's a sneaky good matchup right there. I know Michigan got hit hard in terms of graduation, but I think they definitely have some upside, and they're obviously going to have Aaron Virtue as their new head coach, as opposed to Mark Rosen, who stepped down. But we'll see what happens. And then Friday, October 13th, Illinois at Ohio State. Sneaky good matchup. Penn State at Iowa, Maryland at Northwestern, Michigan State at Nebraska. Semi-sneaky good matchup. And then Rutgers at Wisconsin. Saturday, you've got Michigan at Indiana, Michigan State at Iowa, and Penn State at Nebraska. Very good matchup right there, as Penn State is really looking to get that Nebraska itch off their back. They definitely want to beat Nebraska. I don't even remember the last time Nebraska has beaten Penn State. I want to say it was like 2016. Maybe it was before that then. Either way, it's been way too long since the Penn State has last beaten Nebraska. So those Nittany Lions are long overdue for a win. Then on Sunday, October 15th, Rutgers is at Illinois, Maryland is at Wisconsin, Northwestern is at Minnesota, and Purdue is at Ohio State. Purdue at Ohio State is a pretty good matchup right there. I think on paper that looks like a fairly good matchup right there. I think Purdue, even though they've got a fairly young team, they take on an Ohio State team trying to rebuild its roster after it got hit hard in terms of the transfer portal and graduation, so we shall see what happens. Then Wednesday, October 18th, Indiana is at Purdue, rivalry matchup. Then Michigan is at Michigan State, rivalry matchup. And then Nebraska is at Northwestern, and Ohio State is at Wisconsin. That's a good matchup right there. Definitely a good matchup. Then Friday, October 20th, Illinois is at Maryland, Iowa is at Penn State, and Rutgers is at Minnesota. Saturday, October 21st, Ohio State is at Indiana, Iowa is at Maryland, Michigan is at Northwestern, and Wisconsin is at Nebraska. Highlight that. That should be on ESPN. Please nationally televise that. I beg of you, world. Please just put it on. Please just nationally televise Wisconsin at Nebraska. It's going to be a barn burner. It's going to go down at the Bob, at the Devaney Center. I don't care what it's called. The Bob, the Devaney Center. It's going down on Saturday, October 21st. Please just nationally televise it. Please. Anyway, so October 22nd, a Sunday, Illinois is at Rutgers, Michigan State is at Minnesota, and Purdue is at Penn State. That's a sneaky good matchup right there. Purdue versus Penn State. I think that's going to be a pretty good matchup right there, just because Penn State has got a lot of firepower and Purdue has Eva Hudson and a bunch of other good players returning, and they've got a good freshman class coming in. So it's the battle of experience and returning players versus youth and somewhat returning players. Then on Wednesday, October 25th, Indiana is at Illinois and Northwestern is at Ohio State. Sneaky good matchup right there for that Northwestern-Ohio State match, but time will tell. Then the rare Thursday matchup on October 26th, as Minnesota is at Purdue. Well worth it to see Minnesota at Purdue. Then Friday, October 27th, Rutgers is at Iowa, Maryland is at Nebraska, Penn State is at Michigan. Also another sneaky good matchup. Then Wisconsin is at Michigan State. Sneaky good matchup right there. Saturday, October 28th, Purdue is at Illinois. Sneaky good matchup. Maryland is at Iowa. Penn State is at Michigan State. And Rutgers is at Nebraska. Sunday, October 29th, Indiana is at Northwestern. Ohio State is at Michigan. And Minnesota is at Wisconsin. Minnesota at Wisconsin, the battle of the border. Circle it, highlight it. Definitely be there if you're a Minnesota or Wisconsin fan. And the Ohio State at Michigan rivalry match. November 1st, a Wednesday, Northwestern is at Illinois. Rivalry match. And then Purdue at Wisconsin. Always a good battle when it comes to those teams. Kelly Sheffield versus Dave Shondell. Never gets old. Friday, November 3rd, Illinois at Rutgers. Maryland at Michigan State. Iowa at Michigan. Minnesota at Ohio State. Very good matchup right there. And Nebraska at Penn State. Like I said, Penn State is long overdue for a win over Nebraska. And if they can't get the win at the Bob, Penn State is going to have to win at Rec Hall. They got to win at Rec Hall. I could see Penn State winning at Rec Hall. And they've got a lot of firepower to their team. And if time permits, I will go over Penn State's team, which I'll also go over Nebraska's team. Anyway, Saturday, Illinois at Wisconsin. Sneaky good matchup. Indiana at Ohio State. Iowa at Michigan. And Maryland at Iowa at Michigan State, and then Maryland at Michigan. Sunday, November 5th, Minnesota at Northwestern, Nebraska at Rutgers, and Penn State at Purdue. Another good matchup right there. Penn State-Purdue. I think that's going to be a very good matchup. Round 2 between those two teams. Going to be the battle of youth and semi-experience versus lots of experience and returning players. And I don't want to say this in a mean and mockingly sort of way, but kind of the transfer portal team. I'm not trying to say that in a mean way, but Penn State is kind of last year's San Diego. But again, the transfer portal works. If the transfer portal works for your team, then it's going to get you an NCAA championship. And also, you look at Texas as well. They benefited from the transfer portal as well, getting Maddie Skinner and a bunch of other talented players from the transfer portal too. So the transfer portal does work, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, Wednesday, October 8th, Michigan State at Ohio State and Northwestern at Nebraska. Everyone is probably going to be rooting for the underdog Northwestern, but I feel Nebraska is probably going to come out on top, but time will tell. You never know with Northwestern, though. Then Friday, November 10th, Illinois at Iowa, Rutgers at Indiana, Wisconsin at Maryland, Michigan at Penn State, sneaky good matchup, and Purdue at Minnesota. That's a very good matchup right there. Purdue at Minnesota. I mean, Minnesota returns a good portion of its team despite losing a few players to graduation, but they still have Taylor Landfair, last year's Big Ten Player of the Year. It's sure to be a barn burner. Then Saturday, November 11th, surprisingly, we get this match on Veterans Day. Wisconsin at Penn State. Clear your plans. It's going down at Rec Hall. Nationally televised this game on maybe FS1. I don't care if there's college football going on. Nationally televised this game somehow, some way, please. Anyway, November 12th, a Sunday, Illinois at Nebraska, Minnesota at Indiana, Northwestern at Iowa, Ohio State at Maryland, Michigan at Rutgers, and Michigan State at Purdue. Then Friday, November 17th, Ohio State at Illinois, Maryland at Indiana, Iowa at Minnesota, Michigan at Nebraska, Michigan State at Penn State, Northwestern at Rutgers, and Wisconsin at Purdue. Wisconsin at Purdue, round 2. This time it's going to be in Indiana. Boy, howdy, that's going to be a great matchup. Then Saturday, November 18th, Michigan at Illinois, Wisconsin at Indiana, Maryland at Purdue, Michigan State at Rutgers, Ohio State at Minnesota. Very good, pretty good matchup right there. Well, I don't want to say pretty good matchup. A very good matchup. And then Northwestern at Penn State. Then Sunday, November 19th, Nebraska at Iowa. Then the last week of the NCAA women's volleyball season consists of Illinois at Minnesota, Indiana at Michigan State, Iowa at Northwestern, Rutgers at Maryland, Purdue at Michigan, Nebraska at Wisconsin. Round 2 of those 2 teams. Round 2, put it on national TV. I do not care what it takes. Put it on national TV. Please, please, please. Nebraska at Wisconsin. Just do it. Do it! Sorry if I just blew up someone's earbuds or headphones. And then Penn State at Ohio State. That, too, is going to be a good matchup. Though one could probably... Though if someone's a gambling man or gambling person, someone's probably going to put money on Penn State. And then the last day of the regular season, Saturday, November 25th, Illinois at Northwestern, rivalry match. Indiana at Michigan, Iowa at Wisconsin, Purdue at Michigan State, Nebraska at Minnesota, very good matchup right there, and Rutgers at Ohio State. So like I said, Nebraska at Wisconsin, or Nebraska-Wisconsin in general, really needs to be on national TV. I mean, obviously, Wisconsin has gotten the better of Nebraska, kind of like how Nebraska's gotten the better of Penn State. But honestly, we need to see some of these Big Ten matches on national TV. Yes, y'all are going to say, well, we have the Big Ten Network. Why don't you just watch that? Well, not everyone has the Big Ten Network. Some of these volleyball matches should be nationally televised. Just like how ESPN nationally televised the SEC matches in the Big Ten match. You know, like with the Kansas and the Texas and the blanking on it. Missouri and Tennessee match from last year. Sorry, I was blanking on it. I was trying not to sound like Bill Cosby. You know, with the Minnesota and the Tennessee and the Missouri and the Texas and the Kansas and the, you know what I'm talking about. I digress. But we really should see more nationally televised NCAA women's volleyball matches, especially in the Big Ten. Like, that's kind of the X Factor women's volleyball conference, even though there were none in the Final Four last year in the NCAA tournament. But I digress. Anyway, so that is that for the Big Ten women's volleyball schedule release. So let's jump on over to some schedule releases. Let's jump on over to Nebraska. If we could speed right through it, then that would be awesome sauce, because then I could maybe preview Penn State's. So Nebraska released their schedule last week, and they kick off the season on October 25th at the Devaney Center against Utah State. And then the day after, they've got Lipscomb, and then the day after that, August 27th, a Sunday, they've got SMU. And then they've got Volleyball Day in Nebraska. And it's going to feature Nebraska Kearney versus Wayne State. But more importantly, it's going to feature Nebraska versus Omaha, University of Nebraska-Lincoln versus University of Nebraska-Omaha in Memorial Stadium, which is basically the place where Nebraska football plays its matches. And then there's going to be a concert afterward. I forgot who was playing, but I'm not going to try to guess who it is going to be. But honestly, I want to say it's sold out or being close to sold out. It's going to fill like 88,000 plus. And Volleyball Day in Nebraska is going to be poppin'. Sorry if I sounded weird like that, but I digress. Then Nebraska on September 3rd, a Sunday, hits the road to Manhattan, Kansas to take on Kansas State. Then September 6th, Nebraska welcomes Creighton to the Devaney Center, a.k.a. the Bob. Then on September 9th, Nebraska welcomes Long Beach State. Now you're probably wondering, why does Nebraska schedule Long Beach State? Simple, because Long Beach State's head coach, Tyler Hildebrand, was a former assistant of John Cook's coaching staff. There you go. So for those that are clueless and are wondering, well, why would they schedule that team? There's your answer. Also, Long Beach State loves to schedule tough, and Tyler Hildebrand knows a thing about scheduling tough. I think it's going to be a sneaky good matchup because Long Beach State is kind of leveling up in terms of getting good players. That's just my opinion, and I'm maybe a little biased, but I did see their scrimmage against UCLA, and while UCLA wasn't at full strength, they did look pretty good. But I digress. Anyway, so Nebraska, following the Long Beach State match, they'll be hitting the road to Northern California to take on Stanford on Tuesday, September 12th. Then on Sunday, September 17th, Nebraska will be back at the Bob to take on Kentucky. That will conclude their non-conference schedule. Then on Friday, September 22nd, Nebraska opens up Big Ten play against Ohio State. Then, 2 days after, Sunday, September 24th, they host Minnesota. Then on Friday, September 29th, they hit the road to West Lafayette to take on Purdue. And then the day after, they will hit the road, I say that loosely, to play Indiana. And then those two matches actually begin a 4-game road trip, as Friday, October 6th, Nebraska hits the road to East Lansing to take on Michigan State. And then the day after, they hit the road to Ann Arbor to play Michigan. And then on Friday, October 13th, Nebraska heads back to the Bob to take on Michigan State. And then they welcome Penn State to the Bob. And then on Wednesday, October 18th, Nebraska heads down to the Windy City, a.k.a. Evanston, to take on Northwestern. Then Saturday, October 21st, Nebraska welcomes Wisconsin for a duel of the ages. And then Friday, October 27th, Nebraska welcomes another red team in Maryland and yet another red team in Rutgers. So they might as well rename their next 3 games against Wisconsin, Maryland, Rutgers, Seeing Red. Anyway, Friday, November 3rd, Nebraska will host Penn State. And then Sunday, November 5th, Nebraska will be at Nebraska will be at Penn State on Friday, November 3rd, and then they will be at November 5th at Rutgers. Then Wednesday, November 8th, they will host Northwestern, and then Sunday, November 12th, they will be at Illinois. Friday, November 17th, Nebraska will host Michigan, and then Sunday, November 19th, they will hit the road to Iowa City to take on Iowa, and then that will begin their 3-game road trip to end the season in terms of the regular season, as Friday, November 24th, Nebraska is at Wisconsin. And then to close out the regular season, Nebraska is on the road to take on Minnesota, which I think is going to be a great matchup. So now looking at Nebraska as a whole in terms of their roster. So their roster is kind of interesting. So they lost a good amount of players last year due to graduation / the transfer portal and to personal reasons. So they lost Nicklin Hames, they lost Kenzie Knuckles, Maddie Kubik, and Caitlin Horde, and they also lost Whitney Launstein, who unfortunately kind of is dealing with who lost her father, and then she's having to deal with her mental health things, which is unfortunate. But they do have Becca Alec, Lexi Rodriguez, Kennedy Orr, Allie Batenhorst. If I mispronounce that, Nebraska fans, don't kill me for saying that. Lindsay Krause and Maggie Mendelson. Now, Maggie Mendelson, I think, can challenge her way to being a starting middle blocker. I think she and Becca Alec can be a starting middle blocker. But they also have Andy Jackson, who is going to be trying to start but she's a freshman. So Andy Jackson and Maggie Mendelson, keep an eye on that middle blocker 2 matchup, but definitely keep an eye on Becca Alec as the starting middle blocker. But you also have the other key player for Nebraska, as Merritt Beeson is going to be filling the role quite nicely for Nebraska, as remember, she transferred from Florida, and I think she could really do wonders for the Huskers this year. And then you've also got Bergen Riley, who is a 6'3 setter. I want to say she's probably like 6'4 or 6'5 on a good day. Then you've got Harper Murray, who has just been spectacular on the U.S. youth teams. Like I said, Andy Jackson, keep an eye on her. They've also got 2 more freshmen who are probably going to be really good. And obviously they lost Annie Evans to the transfer portal. She's at San Diego, but that's no big deal. Like, Nebraska is probably going to be amongst some of the top teams. Some people might think that Nebraska is going to take a step back. No. Nebraska is definitely going to be up there in talent, and for those that are saying that Nebraska is going to meet their demise, you must not be a Nebraska fan. or your team must really have gotten their butts kicked by Nebraska millions and billions and gazillions of times. So for Nebraska, I think they've got a lot of potential. And with Merritt Beeson in the fold and with a lot of youth on their team, I think this team can do a lot of damage. And with Lexi Rodriguez at the libero position, and I'm fairly certain Kennedy Orr will probably be the setter. If not, they could have 6-2 with Bergen Riley. I think that'll be a recipe for success. I really think that Nebraska is going to have a lot of success next year, and I think with that tough schedule, I think they can definitely make some noise. And we are currently 50 minutes into this recording, as we might as well go over Penn State's schedule, as Penn State also released their schedule last week, as Penn State made it to the Sweet 16 last year, for those that are remembering, as their first match of the season. And I kind of alluded this to when I discussed Florida's schedule. They are in the Road to Tampa Bay Invitational, as they play Florida in Tampa Bay at the Amalie Arena in Tampa Bay, Florida, in the Road to Tampa Bay Invitational. That's already a good matchup right there. Florida versus Penn State. And then the day after, August 26th, Penn State plays Georgia Tech. I'm not sure why they don't play Tampa Bay, but maybe it's a scheduling conflict, but I digress. After the Road to Tampa Bay Invitational, Penn State hosts its own invitational, the Penn State Invitational, as they host Western Kentucky on Friday, September 1st. Then they've got Colgate on Saturday, September 2nd. And then on Sunday, September 3rd, Penn State will host James Madison. And then they've got road matchups on Friday, September 8th against Temple in Philadelphia. And then on Sunday, September 10th, they will hit the road to Louisville to take on Louisville. And then they host the Penn State Classic, another tournament, as they will host UMBC on Friday, September 15th. And then they will also host Seton Hall on Saturday, September 16th. So that concludes their non-conference schedule. Then they open up Big Ten Conference play against Rutgers on Wednesday, September 20th. Then they have a 3-game road trip starting on Sunday, September 24th at Northwestern, then Friday, September 29th at Illinois, and then the day after, they got Minnesota, like I alluded to earlier. Then Friday, October 6th, Penn State is home against Indiana, and then the day after, they are home against Ohio State. Friday, October 3rd, they are at Iowa, and then the day after, another quick turnaround, they are hitting the road to Lincoln as they play Nebraska. Then Friday, October 20th, they've got the start of a 2-game homestand as they play Iowa, and then Sunday, October 22nd, they've got Purdue. Then Friday and Saturday, October 27th and 28th, they are at the Michigan schools, being Michigan and Michigan State. Friday, November 3rd, they are home against Nebraska. And then Sunday, November 5th, they are at Purdue. Then Friday, November 10th, they are home against Michigan. Then the day after, Saturday, November 11th, Veterans Day, they are home against Wisconsin. Friday, November 17th, they are home against Michigan State. And then the day after, they are home against Northwestern. Then they close out their last 2 matches on the road in terms of the regular season, as they are at Maryland on Wednesday, and then they close out the regular season on Friday, November 24th at Ohio State. So for Penn State, here's what their roster looks like. They lost Elena Salasia, their setter. They lost Katie Clark, and then they also lost Kashana Williams. They do return Taylor Trammell, Maddie Blinovich, Gillian Grimes. I'm probably going to mispronounce this girl's name, but Angelina Stark, Cassie Kurshin, Zoe Wetherington, and Allie Holland. So those are their players that they return, right? Wrong. They have a lot more players that they returned, as they got a lot of players due to the transfer portal, as they got Mac Pedraza from Ohio State, who is a setter. They also got Jess Maruzik, outside hitter, senior from Michigan. They got Cameron Hanna, right side senior from Clemson. They got Lena Perugini, a graduate slash fifth-year player who was a libero slash defensive specialist from Coastal Carolina. And they also got 2 other setters via the transfer portal. And they also got 4 incoming freshmen, one of which is a 6'4" outside hitter, and the other is a 6'3" middle blocker. So when you look at this Penn State team, like I mentioned, this team is a semi-transfer portal team. This team is going to be really spanking good. Zoe Weatherington had 305 kills, and she was second on the team behind Kashana Williams. And then they also have Allie Holland, who returns. Taylor Trammell returns. You got to remember, Taylor Trammell got injured and had to miss the remainder of the season. With her returning in the fold, that's going to be another feather in Penn State's cap. Maddie Blinovich, she returns. She's probably going to be the libero, but she's going to have some competition with Lena Perugini. And then Allie Holland led the team in aces last year with 32, though you also have Gillian Grimes, who was third on the team with 29. Blinovich was fourth with 28. Cassie Kurshin had 24 aces to go along with 245 digs. So for Penn State's women's volleyball team, I'm just going to say this. This has got to be the year they break through. Yes, you've got Nebraska, who's also good. You've got Wisconsin, that's also good. You've got your other good teams that's really good. But you have to realize something. This Penn State team is built to win now. There is no excuses for this Penn State team. They have to get to at least the Elite Eight. I am predicting Elite Eight or bust. I'm guaranteeing the Elite Eight like Charles Barkley does. So that's my prediction. Because you look at this talent. This team is way too talented to not make the Elite Eight. I'm just saying, y'all, because that is a very stacked team right here. So we'll see what happens. And some of these players can even exercise their 5th year in terms of their COVID year. But all in all, for Penn State, this is going to probably be a very good year. I think Penn State can definitely make a lot of noise this season. So we'll see what happens with the Nittany Lions and Katie Schumacher-Cawley's team for her sophomore year as head coach. But I think she's going to do wonders with this team. And for those that are probably saying that they're going to be taking a step back without Kashana Williams and Katie Clark and Elijah, well, again, you must not be a Penn State fan, or your team must have gotten beaten quite a bit by Penn State. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think your Penn State is going to be back. But we'll see. Time will tell. And I guess I should also mention, and I think I might have mentioned this a little bit earlier, but Penn State did get 2 other setters. Now, I don't know why they have 2 other setters, but I'm fairly certain they'll go with Mac Pedraza as setter, unless they really want to start. They have to start Mac Pedraza at setter. I mean, maybe they could run a 6-2 offense, but I don't know. But that's not my decision. I'm not the head coach of Penn State women's volleyball. But that's going to do it for the schedule breakdown of Nebraska and Penn State. We'll take ourselves a quick break, but when we come back, we'll have the schedule breakdowns of Washington State, Stanford, and Washington women's volleyball. And then we've got the NVA preview for event number 4. And then I will send you all on your way. So keep it locked here. You are listening to Set Point here on IA Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, sports fans. It's me, your boy Larry B, and I want to walk you through the world of sports. No. Not just the mainstream major TV deal type sports, although those are important too. But let me be your guide through your journey of all sports, from college to the pros, the minors, and everything in between. Each week, we are talking sports galore with true diehards just like you from a hardcore fan's perspective that's sure to quench your thirst around leagues you may know all too well and some you may even discover here. That's right, sports fans. If you love sports of all kinds, enjoy hearing amazing sports stories, and respect all sports because you know how difficult any of them can be to play or compete in, then this is your show. Join me, your boy Larry B, on the defining moment each week here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports, and let the sports come to you.
Sports fans, do you like teams that are tough, cities that are tougher, and fan bases that are passionate about their teams? How about teams that are historic and stadiums that are iconic? Then you belong in Chicago, and you need to check out Chi-Town Weekly. Join me, Adam Kernan, every week as we keep up with all things Chicago sports. Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks, Cubs, White Sox. We'll cover them all, plus more. The Windy City is always buzzing, and we'll keep you up on all the big games and major stories. So tune in to Chi-Town Weekly every week right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Back with segment number 2 of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. Definitely check out Chi-Town Weekly coming on up later on in the day, as Adam Karnick will be having a pair of guests, being Davidson Crooks of Fast Break, one of the hosts of Fast Break. He and Adam will be talking about ways to repair the Chicago Bulls, and then he will have another guest at Cognac Boys. But either way, Chi-Town Weekly is going to be on at Poppin'. That will be on at 5 p.m. Pacific time, which is when Chi-Town Weekly goes on every single week primarily. And then normally I follow him, but because of my work schedule, I have to basically be on this week because of purposes of I will get into a little bit later. But let's get on into the second half of Set Point. So let's break down some more NCAA women's volleyball schedules. Let's break down some Pac-12 schedules, as we've got Washington State's schedule that was released, as the Pac-12 released its schedule last week, as we had certain teams releasing their schedules left and right, as at first it came out to being 6 teams, one of which was Washington State, and then eventually more teams started to release it. Unfortunately, we have not seen USC or UCLA release their schedule, but I digress. So anyway, Washington State kicks off its season in Louisville as they play Wright State on Friday, August 25th, and then on Saturday, August 26th, Washington State will play the host Louisville, and then after that, Washington State will play Troy in Louisville to close out the Louisville Invitational. And then Friday, September 1st, Washington State will host Northwestern State, and then they'll also host Drake, not the rapper, the school. And then on Saturday, September 2nd, Washington State will play Tulsa at Bowler Gym. Then Washington State has the Cougar Classic, as on Wednesday, September 6th, Washington State will play UC Irvine. Then on Thursday, September 7th, Washington State will play Towson. So pretty good matchup right there. Then Friday, September 8th, we've got the Battle of the Cougars, as we've got the BYU Cougars taking on the Washington State Cougars at Bowler Gym. Then it starts to ramp up a bit for Washington State, as Wednesday, September 13th, Washington State hits the road to Waco, Texas to take on Baylor. And then after that, Friday, September 15th, Washington State closes out their non-conference schedule in Austin, Texas, to take on the reigning NCAA champion, Texas. So that concludes Washington State's non-conference slate as they open up Pac-12 play on Thursday, September 21st at Bowler Gym against Washington. Then on September 24th, they hit the road to Tucson to take on Arizona, which begins a 3-game road trip as Thursday, September 28th, Washington State plays Oregon State at Oregon State. And then Sunday, October 1st, Washington State hits the road to Eugene to play Oregon. And then Friday, October 6th and Sunday, October 8th, Washington State plays Cal and Stanford respectively. Then Friday, October 13th and Sunday, October 15th, Washington State plays Utah and Colorado. Then here comes their West Coast road trip to Southern California as Washington State. I wish they could flip the two schools as Washington State plays Friday, October 20th at USC, and then on Sunday, October 22nd at UCLA. I kind of wish they could have played USC on Sunday instead of UCLA on Sunday, but it is what it is. Then Friday, October 27th and Sunday, October 29th, Washington State will host the Oregon schools, Oregon and Oregon State. Then Friday, November 3rd and Sunday, November 5th, Washington State will hit the road to Northern California to take on Stanford and Cal respectively. Then Washington State will host the SoCal schools on back-to-back days, Friday, November 10th and Saturday, November 11th, UCLA and USC. Then Washington State hits the road to the Rocky Mountain schools, Colorado and Utah on Friday, November 17th and Sunday, November 19th. Then Wednesday, November 22nd, Washington State will host Arizona State. And then to close out the regular season, Washington State will hit the road, I use that term very loosely, to Seattle to take on Washington. So I have been hyping up Washington State quite nicely, as they have a lot to be bought in terms of their team. They have a lot of returning players this year. For starters, they returned Pia Timmer, their kill leader. She had 416 kills. They also returned Magda Jelarova, who had a whopping 176 blocks and 290 kills. She hit 389 as well. They also returned Carly Basham, who had 387 digs. Katie Ryan, who also had 294 digs, which was third on the team. Argentina Ung, who was the team setter last year, who also had 264 digs. They also returned Veronica Wojidila, who had 63 blocks, and then they also returned Jasmine Martin, who had 39 blocks and 47 kills. She'll also make an impact with the team. But there's one more player that Washington State has on their team. They also added Iman Isanovic, who is a graduate outside hitter who had 421 kills at Arizona State, and she had 223 digs, which was fourth on Arizona State. So for Washington State, you have a lot to be excited about if you're a Cougar fan. And if you're not a Cougar fan, you have a lot to buy in when it comes to this Cougar team. You have to buy stock into the Cougars. I am begging you. This Washington State team is the real deal. And they're playing some legit opponents. They're playing Baylor and Texas. And they're also playing some pretty darn good teams as well before Pac-12 play starts. They got Towson, which obviously they're good in their conference, but they made the NCAA tournament. Yes, they lost to Georgia in the first round, but hey, they only had lost one match before losing in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Then they lost to BYU, or then they have BYU, and then they've got Louisville. So other than the other matchups, Washington State has some pretty darn good matchups. Heck, even the UC Irvine matchup is sneaky good as well. So I really think Jen Greeny has a lot going on for her team, and I really think that Washington State can make a lot of noise in the Pac-12. I don't think Washington State gets a whole lot of love. I think they're just overshadowed by Stanford and Oregon, maybe UCLA and USC, and obviously Washington. I think Washington State needs some love. And while we're on the topic of Washington, that's actually a perfect segue to go into the next Pac-12 schedule that got released, being Washington's. So Washington had themselves quite an interesting year. They lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament to TCU. But that doesn't mean they're going to be taking this lying down. And also Keegan Cook stepped down as head coach. But here's their schedule. They open up their season in southeastern Louisiana as they start off the season against UTEP, and then they play the host southeastern Louisiana later on that day. And then the day after they play Grambling State, which that concludes their first week. Then they play in the Long Beach State tournament as they play host Long Beach State on Friday, September 1st. I will definitely go to that match. I definitely want to see Washington in person. And I want to meet all the Washington players because I never, ever, 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 ever get to see Washington. But I digress. And then on Saturday, September 2nd, Washington will play Indiana, which I think is going to be a sneaky good matchup right there. Indiana finished above 500. Probably could have made the NCAA tournament, but unfortunately the losses just kind of piled up too much for the Hoosiers. Then Washington has its, I guess, mini tournament as they play Memphis on Thursday, September 7th. Then they play UNLV on Friday, September 8th, and then they host Florida International on Sunday, September 10th. Then they'll hit the road back to California for the San Luis Obispo. So go figure, they're playing two Big West teams in tournaments. As Thursday, September 14th, they play the host Cal Poly in the Cal Poly tournament. And then Friday, September 15th, they play Pepperdine. And then Saturday, September 16th, they play St. Mary's, which I don't know why they have to put California. There's only one St. Mary's, and it's St. Mary's of California. But I guess that's kind of why it's SMC, but whatever. And then just like I mentioned with Washington State's schedule, Washington opens up Pac-12 play at Washington State in Pullman, Washington. But unlike Washington State, they've got a 4-game road trip as Sunday, September 24th, they hit the road to Tempe to take on Arizona State. Then Friday, September 29th and Sunday, October 1st, they play Oregon and Oregon State. Then Friday, October 6th and Sunday, October 8th, Washington will welcome Stanford and Cal to Seattle, Washington. Then Friday, October 13th and Sunday, October 15th, Washington will welcome Colorado and Utah. Then Friday, October 20th and Sunday, October 22nd, Washington will hit the road to Southern California to take on UCLA and USC respectively. Then Friday, October 27th and Sunday, October 29th, Washington will welcome Oregon State and Washington. Then on Friday, November 23rd and Sunday, November 5th, Washington will hit the road to Northern California to take on Cal and Stanford. Then Friday, November 10th and Sunday, November 12th, unlike Washington State, who is playing on Veterans Day, Washington will play USC and UCLA on those respective days, in that respective order. Then on Friday, November 17th and Sunday, November 19th, Washington will hit the road to the Rocky Mountain Schools to take on Utah and Colorado in that respective order. Then Wednesday, November 22nd, Washington will host Arizona. And then to close out the regular season, Washington will host Washington State in the Pac-12 finale. So looking at Washington, they got hit hard in terms of graduation. They lost LMA Powell, their all-time leading setter, or probably one of the all-time leading setters in NCAA history. They also lost Sophie Summers, Claire Hoffman, Maren Grote to graduation as well. So those are some key players that they lost. But they do return Maddie Ensley, who they lost to injury last year. They also return Lauren Bays, their libero, who had 324 digs. They also return Imani Bush, who had a fantastic freshman year. She had 263 kills, which was third on the team. And they also return Audra Wilms, who had 89 kills in only 60 sets played, which is pretty good. So for Washington, they also got May Pertovsky, a graduate outside hitter / middle blocker from Michigan. She had 212 kills and 76 blocks, which is pretty good. And keep an eye on the setter battle between Molly Wilson and Casey Litzow, who is an incoming freshman. So that's something you definitely want to keep an eye on, just because it's not going to be easy replacing LMA Powell at setter. You don't just replace LMA Powell at setter overnight. It just does not work that way. LMA Powell is a fixture in Washington history. It just doesn't. You just don't say, "Oh, let's just replace her with one setter. Problem solved." No, it does not work that way. So I'm definitely predicting Molly Wilson and Casey Litzow, unless, of course, Washington can get another setter via the transfer portal. But time is kind of running out for them in terms of that regard. But we'll see. And Larry B pops in the chat room. Thank you for tuning in, brother. He says Stanford is always a tough customer. And that is actually perfect segue to go into the final Pac-12 schedule release, or the schedule release in terms of NCAA women's volleyball in general, and that is Stanford. Also got to give a shout out to Angela Winstead and Davidson Crooks that popped into the chat room. Thank you for tuning in. So Stanford opens up its season in Greeley, Colorado, as this is kind of a Colorado road trip, as they open up the season at Northern Colorado, and then the day after they play Colorado State. So interesting first two games. They've got Northern Colorado and Colorado State. Now, obviously, Northern Colorado, I want to say, was the team that made the NCAA tournament, and that gave San Diego a run for its money in round one. And then Colorado State has always been a sneaky good, not on Power 5 conference team. But unfortunately, last year was kind of the lone exception. And then Tuesday, August 29th, Stanford will welcome Florida to Maples Pavilion. Then Sunday, September 3rd, Stanford will hit the road to Texas to take on Texas. And then Stanford will remain in the Lone Star State, as they'll hit the road to Houston to take on Rice. And this is kind of the big-time thing right here. They've got the Big Ten Pac-12 Challenge, but instead of Penn State partaking in the Big Ten Pac-12 Challenge, which you probably should have caught when I broke down Penn State's schedule, Ohio State will be taking the place of Penn State, as Stanford will be hosting the Big Ten Pac-12 Challenge, and their first match in that challenge will be against Ohio State on Friday, September 8th. And then the day after, Saturday, September 9th, Stanford will be playing Minnesota. Then Tuesday, September 12th, they've got a partial round 3 against the Big Ten, as Stanford will host Nebraska. And then Sunday, September 17th, Stanford will hit the road to finger-licking Louisville to take on the Louisville Cardinals. And that concludes their non-conference schedule. Then they've got this weird Tuesday game. A Tuesday game against Cal. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, but Tuesday, September 19th, Stanford hits the road to Berkeley to take on Cal. Then Sunday, September 24th, Stanford will hit the road to Boulder to take on Colorado. Then Stanford will welcome the Arizona schools on Friday, September 29th, and Sunday, October 1st, Arizona State and Arizona respectively. Then Stanford hits the road to the Washington schools Friday, October 6th, and Sunday, October 8th against Washington and Washington State. Then on Friday, October 13th, and Sunday, October 15th, Stanford welcomes the SoCal schools, USC and UCLA in that order respectively. Then Friday, October 20th, and Sunday, October 22nd, Stanford hits the road to the Oregon schools, Oregon State and Oregon. Looking forward to that Oregon matchup. Then Friday, October 27th, and Sunday, October 29th, Stanford hits the road to the Arizona schools, where they play Arizona and Arizona State in that order. Friday, November 3rd, and Sunday, November 5th, Stanford Stanford welcomes Washington State and Washington to their humble abode in Maples Pavilion. And then Thursday, November 9th, and Saturday, November 11th, Stanford welcomes Oregon and Oregon State. Then Friday, November 17th, and Sunday, November 19th, Stanford hits the road to Southern California to play UCLA and USC in that order. Might be thinking of going to that Stanford-USC match. Not quite sure, but I'm definitely leaning toward it. Then Wednesday, November 22nd, Stanford will host Utah, and then to close out the regular season, Stanford will play Utah at home to close out the regular season. So Stanford, as Larry alluded to, is indeed a tough customer. And that's not even including their freshman class. They returned practically all of their important players from last year. They returned Kendall Kipp, who was their All-American. She had 528 kills. She had 319. They returned Katie Baird, who had 385 kills. McKenna Vicini returns. They also return Aaliyah Rubin, who had a stellar freshman year. Sammy Francis also returns at middle blocker. Cami Miner returns at the setter position. Elena Ogilvy returns at the libero position. They also have Annabelle Smith, who returns at the middle blocker position, who could also back up Sammy Francis and McKenna Vicini. This team is built to win this year. Just like Penn State, Stanford is built to win this year, and this is going to be a special team. I really think Stanford has the chance and potential to win it all this year. And no, Mike, Florida State did not win it all, and I don't know if they're going to win it all, considering Texas, Stanford, and all of these other talented teams are crawling in the NCAA women's volleyball world. So it's going to be probably another few more years until Florida State wins it all in women's volleyball, unfortunately for Mike Pat. But back to Stanford, the Stanford team is super stacked. I don't think a whole lot is going to be stopping this team. I just don't see a whole lot. It was one thing returning Kendall Kipp, but returning Katie Baird and Aaliyah Rubin and all these other players, this team is going to be special. And they were just one set away from advancing to the Final Four. All they just needed to do was just take that fifth set against San Diego, and then they would have been Final Four bound. But unfortunately, it just sadly wasn't meant to be. But for Stanford, I really think that this Cardinal team definitely has the potential of making a deep NCAA tournament run. If I had to pick, I'd say that this is probably an early favorite to win it all. Them, Penn State, maybe Texas, probably Pitt can definitely do some damage this year. So we'll see what happens, but I'm very confident in Stanford this year. I could say with a lot of confidence that Stanford can at least make it to the Elite Eight of the NCAA tournament this year. Heck, maybe even the Final Four. I really can definitely say that. And they're kind of in win now mode. And honestly, someone who has seen Kendall Kipp ever since her high school days, I think it would be really awesome to see Kendall Kipp win another NCAA championship. But we'll see. So that is that for all of the NCAA women's volleyball schedule breakdowns right there. Before we head on out of here, we obviously have to preview the NVA just because, well, that is something that's going to be happening this weekend. But before I do, we have some NVA news to go over because I, Teran Rodriguez, am your one-stop shop for all that is NVA news. And I alluded this last week on Twitter at set_point.ie, but this weekend's NVA matches will not be played at Long Beach City. It will be played at Artesia High School. So if you're in the Long Beach area, please, please, please do not go to Long Beach City College. Please do go to Artesia High School. It's about 15 or so minutes away from Long Beach City College. So, yeah, Artesia High School. I've been to Artesia High School. It's a pretty good gymnasium. It's kind of got that old school like gymnasium feel, but I think it's got like a bigger ceiling feel. So, yeah, yes, Larry, Artesia High School. That is in the Long Beach area. So, and Larry is wondering why. So, the reason being is because Long Beach City College unfortunately could not accommodate to the NVA this weekend, for just this weekend. But it's just for this weekend. Event 5 and the playoffs should still be at Long Beach City College, unless something else comes up. But just for this event, Event 4 is going to be at Artesia High School, not at Long Beach City College. So, honestly, do go to Artesia High School, not Long Beach City College, and I look forward to seeing you all there if you all are going to be there. All right, but now that that's out of the way, let's get on into this Event 4 preview. So, Event 4 will start off on Friday at 10 a.m. all these times will be Pacific time, by the way. But on Friday at 10 a.m., it will start off with the Los Angeles Blaze taking on the Philadelphia Founders. So the Blaze are hungry for a win, and the Founders need to win in order to still be in contention for the playoffs. For the Founders, they have the firepower, and they challenged the Las Vegas Ramblers last event for one set. And the Blaze, they really need to win in order to basically not have the possibility of going winless. I think they do have I think Los Angeles Blaze can definitely win a match. I guaranteed it. The episode after event number 3. So I hope the Blaze does not make me a liar. It's either the Blaze wins against the Founders, or they win in their next matchup, or they win against the Untouchables. But all in all, I do expect the Blaze to win a match sometime down the road. Because if they don't win in their next 3 matches, they're certainly not going to win against the Tyrants. Unless, of course, the Tyrants rest their starters. It's kind of not that... I mean, Larry says the Blaze needs to recruit some local players or something. Well, yes and no. They do have that sort of local players like that, but it's all about getting the same players on that same court in terms of, like, attrition and whatnot. So you're on the right track in that sort of thing, but yeah, but you're on the right track, Larry. But we'll see. And then at 1 p.m. Pacific time, we have the Florida Southern Exposure taking on the Puerto Rico Pythons. So both these teams kept their playoff hopes alive on Friday in the previous event. For the Florida Southern Exposure, their win over the New Jersey Freedom was massive, while the Puerto Rico Pythons defeated a Chicago Untouchables team, which did lose one of their top players in Andrew Kohut. But the Pythons will take any win at this point, because that win over Chicago was their first win in their program's history, and more importantly, it keeps them alive in terms of the playoffs. But for the Pythons, they got to keep this momentum going as they take on a very talented Southern Exposure team, Florida Southern Exposure team, which it appears like they have their full roster for the most part. What really shined for the Exposure is they had their middle blockers, such as Aaron King and Evan McDonough. They also had Sam Jackman really work on the right side, as well as Zach Meyer, who was really good on the left side. So for the Puerto Rico Pythons, Jair Santiago cannot just be Superman. They've got to get other players involved, which was the case in event number 3, especially in the win over the Untouchables. But we'll see what happens come that matchup. I think I have that down as one of my matches to watch for. Be on the lookout for my matches to watch for. Then at 4 p.m., we have the Las Vegas Ramblers taking on the Utah Stingers. The battle of the 2 hot teams, as the Ramblers have won 4 in a row, while the Utah Stingers have won 5 in a row. Here's the deal with these 2 teams. The Ramblers, I think, are really good, and many people thought they were going to take a step back after losing a good portion of their players, right? Wrong. They still have they have a lot of good talent on their team, like Kevin Vaz, Jalen Penrose. The list goes on and on. They even debuted Colton Cowell, and they even had Ryan Manoogian making his season debut. But all in all, for the Ramblers, they have a lot of firepower on their team. Meanwhile, for the Stingers, it looks like their team is starting to become more adept in terms of the new players they've brought on. And I think they found their new setter in Patrick Paragas. And the Coburn brothers, Sam and Kevin, are really adapting well to playing in their first year in the NVA. And heaven knows what's going to happen with Ian Eschenberg. I'm sure he'll be continuing to play in the rotation for Russell Holmes' team. Maybe Shane Holdaway will continue to play in the middle blocker position. I'm not sure. I did hear that he did get another signing to another pro league. But I'm sure that might not affect him as much, but heaven knows. But overall, for the Stingers, this is going to be the event where they're really going to get tested. They've got the Ramblers and another tough team on the horizon this event. Meanwhile, for the Ramblers, they're getting ever so close to clinching their division and clinching a spot in the playoffs, which if they do so, then they'll be sitting pretty, and they'll be able to defend their crown. But for the time being, they really can't underestimate the Stingers. And then closing off Friday's matches, we've got the Texas Tyrants taking on the Orange County Stunners. The Tyrants can clinch their division outright if they defeat the Stunners. But just like the Ramblers, the Stunners have won 4 in a row. The Tyrants are the only undefeated team in the NVA. They are 6-0, and they're only getting better. Asa Matauatia has been quite the decent surprise. He has really been a force at the service line. Jake Langlois has definitely done wonders, as well as Ryan Mather, who has been a great addition for the Tyrants. And heaven knows if the Tyrants are going to get back Gianluca Grosso. I really think that the Tyrants are probably one of the most under the radar teams out there. I don't think they get talked enough, in my honest opinion. So for me, the Tyrants are one win or potential a few losses away from possibly clinching a spot in the playoffs. They've got at least a share of their division locked up. They can clinch the outright division with a win or a loss from the Exposure and a loss from the Matadors. But for the Stunners, they're in a good position as well, as they're leading their division by 2 matches ahead of the New Jersey Freedom. But for them, they're also going to get it tested as well, as they've got another really good team on the horizon, and they've got the Tyrants. So for the Stunners, this is not going to get easy for them. And they've also got the Freedom in the final event, but time will tell. Then on Saturday, we have Larry B's Inland Empire Matadors taking on Nick England's San Diego Wild at 9 a.m. So for the Matadors, they're still in playoff contention. If the playoffs start today, the Matadors would be in the playoffs. However, they would be the 4th place team taking on the top seed in the American Division, which would not be ideal, which would probably be the Las Vegas Ramblers. If the Matadors are going to make a deep run to the postseason, they're going to have to beat a pretty good team. Yes, they were able to do so against the Ramblers in Event 1, but that was Event 1. And the Ramblers did not have their full team. The Matadors almost proved themselves as they nearly beat the Utah Stingers, but they really let that 4th set go. They were up 24-21, and sadly, they allowed a 5th set, and then they just kind of ran out of juice in that 5th set. Against the San Diego Wild, yeah, that's going to be very tough. And the Wild obviously want to bounce back from that loss to the Texas Tyrants. And Nick England knows this. And the Wild are in a very good position, and at least to make the playoffs. In terms of their division, they're 1 game back of the Utah Stingers. But in order to win that division, they're kind of going to need to run the table, which they do have a good shot of doing so. But for them, I think they just can't underestimate anybody. And the Matadors, I think, are doing so great this season, despite the 2-4 record. I think that's a very misguiding record, just because the Matadors, many people did not really have too many expectations for them. And I think for the Matadors, they're going to continue to turn heads. They just have to really ride the coattails of someone other than Cesar Medina. And then at 12 p.m. Pacific time, or 12 p.m. or noon, we have the Utah Stingers taking on the Texas Tyrants. So it's the battle of the 2 teams with the longest winning streaks in the NVA. So barring the Ramblers and the Stunners pulling off an upset, the Stingers and the Tyrants will definitely be a barn burner. And I really think this is a matchup to watch for, just because, again, it's the battle of the 2 teams that have the longest winning streaks in the NVA. For the Stingers, they can get closer and closer to clinching the division. And if for some reason the Wild go 0-2 this weekend and the Stingers go 2-0 this weekend, then the Stingers will rightfully deserve to clinch their division and clinch a spot in the NVA playoffs. For the Tyrants, here's my thing for them. They're about to get tested again. So I said last week the Tyrants got tested in event number 3. Now they're getting tested yet again. So nothing's about to come easy for the Texas Tyrants. But that's what it's all about for them. They want to prove themselves as true contenders. They got to actually take on some of the better teams. Because The old saying goes, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. And eventually the Tyrants are going to be playing these teams come playoff time. So honestly, I really think the Tyrants are going to get that taste of who they're going to be playing in terms of playoff teams. I mean, obviously they played the Freedom and they played the Wild last week, and now they're playing the Stunners and the Stingers. So I really think that this is the time for the Tyrants to really get it going. And if they can get Gianluca Grasso back this weekend, that's going to be perfect for them. And keep an eye on Tanner Maxwell as well. He has been setting really well. And keep an eye on those middle blockers for the Texas Tyrants as well. Vekas Lewin, he has been vastly underrated. He's been a blocking machine, and he's been terminating in the middle. So do not underestimate those. Do not underestimate him, and do not underestimate the other middle whose name I'm blanking on, but I digress. And then we have my match of the week. The Orange County Stunners taking on the Las Vegas Ramblers. This is definitely the match of the week because it's a rematch of last year's NVA championship. So last year the two teams did not meet in the regular season. However, they met in the NVA finals for the second straight year, where the Ramblers managed to beat the Stunners in straight sets. And believe it or not, that was actually the first time the Ramblers beat the Stunners in team history. So for the Ramblers, they kind of have a lot to prove because not only are they NVA champions, but they're facing their rival. And for me, I think this is kind of the biggest rivalry in the NVA. Many leagues have their rivals, such as the MLB with the Yankees and the Red Sox, the NBA with the Lakers and the Celtics, the NFL with the Packers and the Bears, as well as the Ravens and the Steelers. The list goes on and on. But I think this is kind of the rivalry of the NVA, just because both of these teams have a lot of respect for each other, and I want to say these two teams have practiced with one another in the same gymnasium. So, and you also got to remember, these two teams have faced in the finals the past 2 seasons. And I want to say they played in the playoff. Well, no, they played in pool play in the COVID year, in the post-COVID year. So, honestly, Ramblers, Stunners, this is definitely the rivalry of the NVA. Unless anyone can give me a 500-word essay on what other rivalry can match this rivalry. I could wait. But that's going to do it for that matchup. And then closing out Saturday's matches, we have the Chicago Untouchables versus the New Jersey Freedom. Man, New Jersey Freedom had such a rotten weekend last event, as they lost 2 5-set matches. The first one was against the Tyrants, losing via reverse sweep fashion, and then they lost against the Florida Southern Exposure when they led 14-11, and they lost off of a service, or they lost the match points off of a service error, a hitting error, and then a back row attacker violation. And then it was 14-14. They hit it wide. They hit the ball out of bounds. So then they never had match point again. And eventually Exposure just won the match. So for the Freedom, if they want to have any sort of chance of making a statement and getting back on track, they're actually going to have to not go 5 sets. And they're going to have to not, mess around with any opponents. And they're going to have to not underestimate anybody, just because it's any given week when it comes to any of these teams. And for the Untouchables, if they want to have any sort of hope of making the playoffs, they're going to need to pull some sort of upset. Their only wins are against the Blaze and the Freedom. Or, I'm sorry, not the Blaze and the Founders, which they have a combined 1 win. I'm not trying to knock those two, but it's not really proving yourself. Yes, I understand the loss to the Pythons hurt because losing Andrew Kohut was so emotionally taxing for them, but you have other players that could step up. And if the Untouchables really want to make the playoffs and prove to them that they are vastly improved from last year, they're going to have to pull off a big win. And it doesn't get easier for them because they've got another really good matchup on the horizon. So for the Untouchables, it's either they beat the Freedom or they beat this up-and-coming matchup that is probably going to be out of the question. But if they're going to pull off a win, they got to beat this Reeling Freedom team, which is coming off of 2 5-set losses from event number 3. And they've lost 3 in a row. So if there is any time to win a match, it's now against the Freedom. And then closing out Event 4, we have Sunday's matches, starting off with the Philadelphia Founders versus the Southern Exposure. This is an important matchup. I know this is the battle of 2 sub-500 teams, but throw out the records. The Founders, if they somehow manage to beat the Blaze on Friday, and if Exposure beats the Pythons on Friday, this could have a lot of playoff implications. Just because if the playoffs started today, these 2 teams would be on the outside looking in. The Founders, even though they have 1 win, they still realistically have a chance to make the playoffs. Exposure, with that win over the Freedom, definitely have a big chance of making the postseason. And it's all about them playing their cards right. And this schedule this weekend is very favorable for the Exposure. And then they also have the Matadors and the Ramblers in Event 5, which is not going to be easy, but they have the players to keep up with some of these teams. And they have been so competitive with these teams that are bigger, stronger, athletic, talented. You get the picture. I've even considered the Florida Southern Exposure as a dark horse to possibly have a deep championship run. But here's the thing. It's all about them having all of their players on the same court whenever possible. So if they can get all their players in the same event on the court in the same rotation whenever possible, this team is definitely going to be a team to watch for and a team that no one is going to want to play just because Sam Jackman and Zach Meyer are a two-headed monster. Aaron King definitely serves tough as well as Evan McDonough. And their setter, Diego Villafane, he is definitely doing wonders at the setter position. I really think that the Florida Southern Exposure can definitely expose teams. Now, as for the Founders, here's my thing. This is winning time right here. They have to win this weekend, otherwise it's going to be very ugly in event number 5. Because they've got the Wild and the Stingers in event 5, and those are 2 tough teams that are going to be vying for playoff spots, and that will have no idea, that are not going to have any intention of sitting their players. So they have to win now. It's winning time for the Founders, kind of like the Lakers. So if the Founders want to get closer and closer to the playoffs, they have to win right now. Otherwise, they're going to be on the outside looking in. Then after Founders Exposure, we have the Puerto Rico Pythons taking on the Los Angeles Blaze. So just like the Founders and Exposure, the Pythons are also in the winning now mode. They have to win now. If they don't win this weekend, then winning is going to be very tough going into Event 5 because they've got the New Jersey Freedom, which are going to be vying for playoff positioning, and then they've got the Orange County Stunners, which are also going to be vying for playoff positioning too. And Jair Santiago cannot play Superman every single night. He does have the reinforcements, like I've mentioned, but they have to be on their A game. Like Rafael Burgos and Steven Morales are 2 players that definitely are prime examples of players that can give Jair Santiago help. And the setter, I think his name is like Luis Ruiz. Luis Ruiz is been dished the ball out really well, and he set the ball really well for the Pythons. For the Blaze, like I said, they really have to. If there's ever a time to win a match, it's this event, and then maybe against the Untouchables. But for the Blaze, if they play their cards right, their next 3 games, they could, hence the word could, make the playoffs. But it's winning time for them. Realistically, they can make the playoffs, but it's winning time for them, even though they're 0-6. But I don't want to. But for purposes of myself, I don't want to eat crow, and I don't want people to say this didn't age well, or Teran said that the Blaze were going to win a game against us, but they didn't. Oh, what happened, Teran? Or what happened? But I digress. So Python's Blaze is basically going to be a win now game. After that, we've got the New Jersey Freedom taking on the Inland Empire Matadors, as Larry B alludes into the chat room. He says we've got the Wild and the Freedom this weekend. We need to go 2-0, and that is exactly what the Matadors need to do. They have to go 2-0 because for them, they've got the tougher schedule between them and the Florida Southern Exposure. On paper. If the Exposure win their 2 matches, and let's say, no offense to the Matadors go 0-2, the Matadors are now 1 game back of the Exposure, which is not going to be pretty. And then they'll be 1 game back of the final event going into... Because obviously the Ramblers want to close out the season strong, and they don't want to have any of their players all rusty and whatnot. And they don't want to leave anything to chance. But for the Matadors, they have to... And you also got to remember that the Exposure beat the Matadors the first meeting. But that was all the way back in Event 1. So for the Freedom, again, they're in a good position to make the playoffs because they're in a comfortable 3rd place in the National Conference. However, they want to improve their seeding, and they want to somehow, hence the word somehow, get back into winning its division winning the Coastal Division against the Orange County Stunners. Just because the Stunners are in a very good position to win the division, especially with the unfortunate weekend that the Freedom had last weekend, or last event. But overall, for the Matadors, this is kind of a crucial weekend for them, just because they are a game ahead of the Exposure. However, or actually, aren't the two... I want to say the 2 teams are tied for the same record. But overall, it's a very tight race for the playoff standings. And honestly, I will say this. It's probably going to come down to the wire, because I know the Matadors have 2 wins. They're 2-4, and then Exposure are 2-4. But I want to say, Exposure have the tiebreaker in terms of head-to-head. But I want to say Matadors have the tiebreaker in terms of points scored, just because they did go 5 with the Stingers. So all in all, if the Matadors go 0-2 and Exposure goes 2-0, then that's basically the worst case scenario for the Matadors. And that's going to find them in a big hole where that probably can't see them coming out of. But it's a tall order, but it's definitely possibly doable. And then the last match of event number 4 is San Diego Wild versus Chicago Untouchables. Well, like I said, Untouchables, if they're gonna need to, if they want to make the playoffs, they have to, hence the word have to, pull off an upset. If they don't pull off an upset against the Freedom or the Freedom or the Wild, then they're basically in deep trouble. And it's unfortunate just because I had a lot of high hopes for the Untouchables, and losing Andrew Kohut really sucks. I admit that. That's really unfortunate, but if they don't play their cards right, then they could be on the outside looking in. Now, fortunately, they are in 4th place, and right behind them is the Founders, and then they've got the Blaze. But if the chips fall correctly for them, then the Untouchables could be in the playoffs without them having to do much. But if they leave everything to chance, and then everything doesn't go their way, then the Untouchables could be in a panic mode, and they could be basically staring down a whole lot of deep doo-doo. But overall, for the Untouchables, they have to pull an upset this weekend if they want to have some sort of chance to possibly make the big dance. And it's doable for them, but honestly, between them and the Founders, it's going to be the tightest race possible. And you also got to remember that the Founders do not have the tiebreaker over the Untouchables. The Untouchables have that the liberty of having the tiebreaker over the Founders. But all in all, for the Untouchables, I don't really see them beating the Wild, just because the Wild, they're one game back of the Stingers, and this is the best chance for the Wild to pounce on the Stingers in terms of the division, because the Stingers are really going to get tested this weekend, while the Wild have only the Matadors and the Untouchables. Now, I'm not trying to say that the Wild are going to just breeze through the Matadors and the Untouchables, just because the Matadors have been vastly improved, and the Untouchables are also improved, but losing Andrew Kohut definitely hurts. But for the Wild versus the Untouchables, on paper, I would definitely put my money on Nick England's team, just because he definitely does not want to lose, and I'm not trying to say that just to win brownie points with Nick England. I promise you I'm not. But I'm definitely putting my money on the San Diego Wild, but time will tell. But that is going to do it for the NBA preview. And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Set Point. It is that time to drop the beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Set Point. I really do appreciate everybody tuning in. I can guarantee you all that this is the last time, hopefully, I will be on at 11 a.m. Pacific time. I will be back on my regular time at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And also, next week is the 200th episode of Set Point, and hopefully I will confirm having Avery Drost on next week's show. I also can guarantee you all I could have Nick England on, but we'll see. I could have new guests on. I like mixing it up quite a bit, but we'll see. Thank you to the chat room. If you listen live, I appreciate you. If you listen on the playback, I appreciate you. If you listen at work, I appreciate you. If you listen at any time, any place, anywhere, I really appreciate you. I appreciate Larry B keeping me company in the chat room. I also appreciate Mike, Pat, David Crooks, and Angela Winstead for popping into the chat room. Larry B, I appreciate you. For everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing off. I will see you all on Friday for the NBA. Remember, no SoCal Supreme Sports Show, which means the next time you will see me on the airwaves is next Monday when I do the 200th episode of Set Point. But until then, have a great rest of the week. I will see you all on Friday at Artesia High School. And be safe, be well, and I will see you Friday at Artesia High School. Peace!